My name is Ratna Omidvar. I'm the president of Maitree. We're delighted to welcome you all. We have audience members from east to west in Canada, close to 8 provinces represented, and many employers from many regions and many sectors. So this is all good news because we're gathered around our computer screens today to hear about a proposal that may change the way employers work in the field of recruiting immigrant talent. We still have a few minutes and people are still walking in, but I think we're going to formally open the webinar and welcome you all. Again, my name is Ratna Omidvar. I'm the president of Maitree. Much of our work at Maitree has focused on the whole issue area of immigrant employment, immigrant talent, and for that reason, it's clear to us that we must also work with employers. We do a bunch of things, most specifically hosting employer best practices on a website called hireimmigrants.ca, which features good ideas and practical tips that you can beg, borrow, and steal from another employer. I urge you to visit this website. And of course, we offer a series of webinars. Today's webinar focuses on the expression of interest model proposed by Citizenship and Immigration Canada. This will be a new system for selecting skilled immigrants. The EOI, as we will refer to it, expression of interest, therefore EOI, will allow employers to play a more direct role in selecting immigrants, permanent residents to Canada. However, I should note that the proposed EOI model is exactly that, a proposal at this stage. There are many details that are not clear. The government is still working some of the details out. Our speakers will speak to what they know of at this point and forecast some of the issues that may be arising. We understand, and we are very fortunate as well, hopefully, to have a representative of Citizenship and Immigration online with us, Christina Norris of Citizenship and Immigration Canada. She's a director of policy, and she has offered to provide us with an update on the latest thinking and to answer some questions. So I think this is all very good. As I noted, we are joined by employers from all over Canada, regulatory bodies, immigrant employment councils, immigrant serving organizations, and representatives of government, federal, provincial, and municipal. So we are really reaching a wide audience today, and I don't know what the weather is like in East or Western Canada, but if it's anything like it is in Toronto, which is really freezing, I'm sure we're very grateful we're able to sit around our desks and our computer screens and learn something while enjoying a nice hot cup of coffee in our warm rooms. This presentation will be recorded and will be made available online for those who are unable to join us today, or if you would like to revisit the presentation or share any part of the presentation with other people. Today we have 2 guests who are going to speak to us, Francis Fong, who is an economist with TD Economics, and Josh Hjartarson, who is the Vice President, Policy and Government Relations for the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. We will ask our panelists to respond to your question and answers during the Q&A session, and as I noticed, the representative from Citizenship and Immigration will also be available, we hope, to answer your questions. I see she is signed on, but I'm not sure we have all this was all last minute, so not quite sure whether we are on the same page. Before we start, let's ask a poll question. The question I want you to all answer, it's a click of the button, very simple. Do you face challenges finding the right talent to meet your labor market needs? A question, yes or no, and the results are coming in. It's a little bit like American Idol, I am sure. The results are coming in. While our participants are filling in the question, let's go First question. My first question to Francis is the one that we all struggle with. Is there or isn't there a labor market shortage?
First of all, thanks, Ratna, for having me here first. And just to answer the question in relatively simple terms, I think it's something that is a question that a lot of people are asking themselves right now. And based on our most current research, it's difficult to conclude because it's not exactly clear-cut. Broad-based, if we're talking about the entire Canadian economy across all sectors, across all industries, across all employer sizes, it's difficult to say that there's a broad-based labor market shortage. I mean, we don't see the kinds of job vacancy rates and wage pressures that significant labor market shortages across the country would typically indicate. However, that's sort of counter to the anecdotal evidence from individual employers, individual sectors, rural communities where you have a lot of small business owners looking for skilled talent. There are a lot of segments of the Canadian economy that are very likely facing very significant labor market shortages, which immigration has up to this point done a very good job of addressing. But from an immigration perspective, more broadly, it's not just about what shortages we face today, but what kind of shortages we will be facing in years down the line. And that's where we start talking about the retirement of the baby boomer population. At this point, it's difficult to say that there's this big exodus of baby boomers. I mean, that's just not really that true because the bulk of the population is, in fact, in their sort of late 40s, early 50s, sort of the prime working age of their careers. So broadly, we don't see that big retirement. But 20 years down the line, when we actually do see them moving outside of the labor market into retirement or into other things, that's when we'll start seeing this very significant skilled labor shortage. And more broadly, we can even say that immigration is going to become a very important aspect of our population growth, let alone our labor force growth. I mean, the latest Statistics Canada's projections suggest that immigration could account for 80 to 90% of net population growth within the next 2 decades. So immigration is going to play a very important role in the labor market, even more so than it already has.
Thank you, Francis. As you can see from our poll, most of our respondents have said that they actually do face a challenge meeting their labor market needs. So there's, as you said, there's context to this, but it seems to be a prevailing trend in our immigration and national narrative that we have people without jobs and jobs without people, to quote Rick Miners. So let's get on to asking Josh the big question. What is the EOI, and why is the government pursuing this idea?
Okay. Thank you once again, Ratna, for inviting me to participate in this call. So the EOI system, I mean, there's a lot of details to be flushed out yet. I mean, we know that. But we have the broad frameworks, the broad strokes of what the EOI model will look like. Basically, the EOI model will be a 2-stage immigration application management system that matches prospective immigrants with employers who are interested in hiring them. So many of the aspects of the system will be web-based, electronic, and automated. So what we're looking at is basically a 2-stage process. One, prospective immigrants will fill in an online expression of interest in coming to Canada as a permanent resident. There'll be certain threshold requirements, and if they meet those threshold requirements, employers will have an opportunity, as will the provincial and federal governments, to pick, if you will, from the pool of candidates and invite them to come to Canada. And at that point, the federal government's due diligence process with respect to security and health, et cetera, will begin. So essentially, we're moving from a first-come, first-served system to a system of where applicants who meet a set of criteria enter a pool, and then it becomes managing supply and demand from an employment and from a labor market and employer perspective. So that, in a nutshell, in a minute or less, is the EOI system.
To use an inelegant metaphor, you could think of it as a pre-sale offer.
Exactly. I mean, there is 2 stages, and if a prospective immigrant meets the minimum requirements, they go into the pool, but a lot of the, let's say, the heavy-duty processing in terms of security checks, et cetera, won't begin until there is they've been selected from the pool either by one of the governments or by an employer. And so in that sense, it is very much a two-stage process, and very much moving away from a first-come, first-serve, where you have this big backlog and people waiting to get into the system. It'll be much more, it's a supply and demand, if you will.
Thank you, Josh. Our question 3, which sort of, I think in a way you have answered that already. Am I correct?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the second part of your question was, why is the government pursuing this idea? And happy to take a crack at that as well.
Sure.
Sorry, I haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, I mean, we do know that the previous system, the broad-based consensus is that the previous selection system was largely broken. We've all heard the stories around backlogs numbering into the tens and hundreds of thousands. So certainly I think the broad prevailing consensus was the system was broken, and that was broad-based. A second concern was, I think, perception of, and an empirical question for sure, but the poor labor market outcomes of many immigrant groups. The idea is people are landing, they don't have immediate connections with employers, and that just starts often a vicious cycle of underemployment and precarious employment. Under the new system, people will have connections with employers and thus start on if you will, a virtuous cycle of employment. And again, relating to this point around the skills shortage that we talked about earlier, the perception is that there are employers who are looking for skills, and the immigration system is one part of meeting the labor market demands of employers. And it's only one part. I mean, obviously we need training systems and so on and so forth. So I would say those are the 3 reasons. 1, backlogs. 2, poor labor market outcomes for immigrants, and also this perception around skill shortages.
That's excellent. Now, the question number 3, which we were going to ask you, was more on the EOI and how it may work. But I kind of think you've covered that. Is that right, Josh?
The one thing I would say, Ratna, is that the system is intended to be much more responsive. So whereas the average wait period, the processing time was between 12 and 18 months, and I think that's being generous, we're going to move to a system that is much more nimble. And I think the informal target is 4 to 6 months, which our stakeholders still say is still too long, but it's much better than the old system. So indeed, there are many aspects we need to drill out, but it is intended to be much more nimble and much more flexible.
I wonder then, Josh and Francis, if this is a good time to ask Christina Norris to come in and to provide us with any updates that she's able to on more on the details of the program.
Sure. Yes. Hello. I apologize for joining your discussion late. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you.
Yes, absolutely.
And thank you for joining us, Christina.
Oh, a pleasure. So my name is Christina Norris, and I'm one of the directors here at Citizenship and Immigration working on expression of interest. And thanks very much for the opportunity to share some remarks. I think, Josh, reflecting on what you just shared now, I think that's actually largely a really a fairly accurate description of EOI and how EOI will work. I mean, I think just to reconfirm, you're absolutely right that the inception for launching an expression of interest system is to better align for immigration intake in skilled immigration categories, better aligned with our processing capacity in the department for more responsive and better processing times. Our operational colleagues and certainly Minister are very clear that faster processing in the range of 6 months is something that we're going to aspire to. And I think also the point that another big rationale for expression of interest that you touched on that is absolutely right is to think about a replacement in it that is a fair and legally sound approach to replacing the first in, first out application management system. And so what we'll be doing with expression of interest is having interested EOI candidates register, answer a series of questions, and if they meet our, as you noted, our minimum entrance criteria, our threshold, I think was the term you used, they will be sorted and ranked. So there will be a sense of, our minister likes to speak about bringing in the best and the brightest as opposed to necessarily the first in line. And this, we hope, is an approach that will suit the needs of, certainly, of employers in a more direct way. So that's really important. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of thinking about what EOI will do. We are going to encourage greater employer influence on immigrant selection, and that's really exciting. At the same time, I think one of the things we'd want to messages in terms of the latest information on EOI is that I think we'd like to remind folks around our virtual table that employer access to EOI candidates will be indirect. So employers will be able to, through a number of avenues, engage with EOI candidates, but unlike Citizenship and Immigration, and unlike our provincial and territorial colleagues, there won't be a direct, for example, portal for employers to look at EOI candidates. We are going to develop a suite of tools, working closely with our colleagues at Employment and Social Development Canada and their job bank for encouraging employers to look at EOI candidates, be matched up with EOI candidates. And we're also starting to think about whether or not colleagues in the private sector job matching arena might also have a way to support some matching of employers to EOI candidates. So those are still, early days for those aspects of the proposal, but an important part of how we move forward. I think,
Thank you, Christina. I'm going to go back to Josh and bring you in periodically. And this is last minute, but it's also keeps it vibrant. Let's get back to Josh on the role of employers. You've heard Christina sort of speak in broad terms about how employers would be involved. Can you add to this, Josh, from what you...
Yeah, I mean, so that's really interesting, and this new information I think is really important in context. I mean, from our perspective, if the system does not work for employers, it will not work. And so the Ontario Chamber has, in partnership with the Ontario Ministry of Citizenship and Immigration, has traveled the province. We've held 11 consultations with over 200 employers. Plus, we have polled employers from across the province, and we've had a response rate of over 1,000. So we have some very, very good data. And one of the things that we come to realize is that, employers will be actually the crucial linchpins in many ways. I mean, they'll be selecting for future Canadian citizens, but on the basis of their employability in many respects. So, and they'll also play the first interface when it comes to settlement. So the employer role, I think, is going to be, quite important. And so we have a series of recommendations in terms of how to make sure that there is employer uptake, if you will, within the system. The fact that employers will not have direct access to the pool is new information, and I'm really, really interested to see how the plumbing will work then to connect employers to the potential candidates. And in fact, it looks like, if I understand correctly, the government will be playing the role of matchmaker, which it will be interesting to see how that's going to work, quite frankly. So lots of details to be fleshed out still.
Lots of details. I'm just going to go back to Christina for one short intervention, if we can keep it tight. If this new system has is based on employer input, to what extent have employers been involved in the design of your proposals to this point? I know there have been a few consultations, but perhaps, Christina, you could bring us up to date on how employers have influenced your thinking on this.
Of course, absolutely. I think over the course of the past year, Citizenship and Immigration has engaged with employers in a number of ways, in a number of avenues. I think, as many of you might know, our Deputy Minister led a series of round table consultations about a year ago, and the report from that series of consultations is posted on CIC's website. And Josh, I hear you. Employers, what we hear from employers is they want fast, they want flexible, they want easy to navigate. Those messages have held true for employers, and our colleagues in Ontario who have shared the outcome of their suite of consultations across their province, as other provincial and territorials have done something similar, have very similar messaging. And so we're listening. In terms of other employer engagement, we have at CIC what we call an employer technical reference group that has been consulted and provided advice on development of the EOI system. I think in addition, we are planning in 2014 to get out again and re-engage employers in a more formal way to let employers know where we're at with the development of the system. So that's part of our planned work. And certainly we are hoping to also work very closely with our colleagues at Employment and Social Development Canada, because a big part of employer and employer use and access of EOI will likely be through ESDC's job bank and a modernized job match service for employers. And we think that's a really important story to tell. So we'll be working closely with those colleagues as well to reach out to many of you on this call.
Okay, thank you, Christina. Back to Francis now. This is really new information for us, but still, can you think about whether this new system will be particularly suited to specific sectors or specific regions or specific size? We've always heard that SMEs have the greatest demand for talent and the greatest challenges accessing that talent. So
that's actually... No, absolutely. I think that's a great point. I mean, this is all brand new information, and I actually have a couple of questions as to, what this indirect access will include. I mean, how much detail are employers going to receive on these candidates? Because that would be a critical component as to the ability of SMEs to assess the quality of the candidates and potentially go out and hire these people or nominate these people for the system. The way it seems right now, I mean, obviously there are a lot of holes in how much information we have available, but the way it seems right now to me, it still seems like the majority of employers who would use this system would be the ones that are currently hiring the most immigrants right now, the larger employers that have the human resources capacity, if you will, to properly integrate and absorb new immigrants, whereas it seems like businesses in rural communities, SMEs all over the country, it's going to be, in fact, more difficult because what we're doing with this system is actually shortening the period of time in which immigrants have to integrate into not just the workplace, but in Canada as well. I mean, previously with the current system, I mean, we might have a permanent resident arrive, and it could take, well, anecdotally, we have sort of evidence to suggest that it takes years for people to quote unquote get up to speed in integrating into their communities and into their workplaces, overcoming language barriers. We're shortening that time horizon so that essentially we're expecting people to quote unquote hit the ground running. In light of that, the employers will have to play a much more significant role, and I think Josh was alluding to this. They will have to play a much more significant role in the settlement process itself, which I'm not certain the SMEs have the capacity to do. So I'm concerned about that.
Okay, so I'm hoping that all these questions that are still not answered and any concerns that we have will be factored in as an informal consultation by CIC. Christina, we certainly hope you will take them back to your shop to consider. Over to our next question, back to Josh.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we're now dealing with new information.
Yep.
Even at this, can you think about the opportunities and challenges that this new system will provide to employers, given the fact that they will not have direct access to the pool?
Well, I think then, I mean, there are lots of opportunities and certainly lots of challenges. In terms of opportunities, I mean, there are, we do know, and alluding to our previous conversation about skill shortages, there are specific sectors and specific geographic regions where we do know that skill shortages exist. And I think that there are tremendous opportunities for employers working in those regions and those sectors to access the system and use it to fill vacancies when it's hard to find local talent. I think that is real. I would echo the concerns from Francis, with respect to, small firms don't necessarily have the have the HR departments or have the economies of scale, if you will, to manage things like, integration into local communities, integration into the labor force, just basically onboarding people so that they understand even the EI system and what the deduction system is around the Social Security, et cetera. This said, there's also, within the new system, there's tremendous opportunities there. There's opportunities for organizations such as mine, like a Chamber of Commerce, to play that sort of third-party role, if you will, to create some economies of scale and scope, to provide information to employers about how to integrate employees, about how to even access the system and use the system to fill skill shortages. So, I think that, certainly there for those that work in the settlement sector, for those that it is a new system and there is a new logic behind it, but I also think that with that there are lots of opportunities. And I think that, and I'll also, as an employer organization like the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, we have to play that virtuous role. We have to let people know that change is in the pipeline. We have to play the role of, and this is how you use the system. Particularly in the context of Ontario, where, the PNP system, we've been historically shortchanged on the PNP system. I think we only have about 5% of the provincial nominees, something like that. Employers aren't used to using the system, and I think that in Ontario the challenge will be even, I think, particularly stark, if you will, than it is in Alberta and Manitoba, where the employers have traditionally, historically, recent history anyway, played a greater role. So I think that it creates a certain onus on organizations, it creates a certain onus on employers, and I'm all about carpe diem. We have to seize the day, and the reality is these changes are coming. And it's our opportunity to sort of to provide these services and this information to our client base. It's a really important role.
Sorry, Ratna, can I just jump in here really quick and add one quick point? I think it's worth noting that we're still really unsure as to what the role of the provinces is in this new system, and in light of that, if the provinces are one of those segments that are able to nominate people for the system, then I think the employer role is actually even greater, because it will be up to the employers, or the relationship between employers and provincial jurisdictions and the provinces themselves, to have some sort of relationship to inform provincial people what kinds of labor market is actually needed. What kind of skills are actually needed, like providing labor market information to those who actually need it, so that they can in turn go and nominate these people for their jurisdictions.
Absolutely. And to echo Francis' point, we kind of live in a data vacuum, if you will. We don't have really a credible one-stop source of what are the skill shortages in what regions and what sectors. There's a lot of academic conversation. We've gone out on with respect to this, but the reality is, if it is going to be driven by demand, we have to know what the demand is. And it's either a combination of, or it's either the employers drive the demand and put it into the system, or it's a combination of good labor market information and employer demand. But if we don't have good labor market information, and you're expecting provinces and the federal government to play a role in the selection, then that has to be fixed for sure.
So given all of this, what can employers do to prep for this new horizon? In particular, we always get questions by and about SMEs. So perhaps you could, what can they do today to prep for Carpe Diem, for tomorrow?
Maybe I can start us off here. I think as a start, Canada already has a very well-developed system of settlement agencies and organizations involved with connecting employers and prospective immigrants or immigrants that are already here. I think for a lot of SMEs is tapping things like local immigration partnership, LIPs, and just acclimatizing yourself to the notion that this is going to be where you will tap your future skilled labor force. That by taking that first step and getting involved right at the start, I think would do a lot in sort of the future usage of this program in whatever form it ends up taking.
I agree. I mean, one of the things we've been hearing loud and clear in our consultations is that, an if you build it, they will come approach will not work, both from the demand and supply side in terms of employers, but also in terms of people wanting to use the system as a vehicle to permanent residence. So, I mean, certainly, what can employers be better prepared to do? I mean, certainly there's a lot, but I also think that there must be a very robust marketing campaign, and I'm sure that there's already thinking going on underway at CIC around this. But I actually think that the roles of employer organizations such as ours, the Canadian Chambers, we have a big role to play in prepping our memberships and prepping our. I think it's huge, and I also think that there's a bit of onus on government here. If there is an online portal, if there is using the job bank, all of this has to be absolutely customer focused. The online system has to be user-friendly, and in the same way, like a government is a large, sophisticated organization, so is a bank like TD, for example, Francis. I mean, when I do my online banking, the instructions are clear, I get it. What has to be imperative is you lower the information and search costs for employers. So when they're looking at it, they understand it. It's not a silo of referrals. If you want this piece of information, go here. If you want that piece of information, go there. I mean, employers can be ready, and we can do our best to be ready. But there's also an onus on government to be very, very customer-focused and very sort of client-friendly, if you will. And the design of the interface, I think, is absolutely key.
Thank you. That was excellent points from both of you. I wonder if Christina would like to comment on this question as well.
Sure. Thank you, Ratna. I completely agree with what my colleagues have just shared. I think we hear you that the EOI system needs to be, I mean, my takeaway is simple and as seamless as possible from the perspective of employers. And we are certainly thinking through what that means and have that top of mind, because as was reflected earlier, we are completely in agreement that we know that immigrants who arrive with a job or who have a job shortly after arrival do better than their counterparts without that employment attachment. So we're completely on board, and I think we hope that in terms of supporting access to the system for small and medium-sized enterprises, that the fact that we're going to be aspiring to do a simple, seamless system that is online. We hear that small and medium-sized enterprises don't always have the HR budget to do heavy recruiting, particularly in rural and smaller regional areas, so that an electronic, online, easy to use, easy to navigate system will hopefully meet some of those needs better. Thanks.
Thank you. I know the audience is also wanting to ask questions, and just to give them some comfort, we have one last question, and then we will get to a more interactive Q&A with audience members. So start thinking about your questions and who you would like the question to be answered by, or if you can. So a final question, Josh and Francis, to both of you, and this is important. We all talk about labor market shortages, and yet there are so many people in Canada, particularly young people, who are unemployed. We also know that immigrants are underemployed. So what can employers do to access talent that's already here?
Well, I will take the first stab at that. I mean, one thing we do know is that, and one of the things that we're trying to change as an employer organization is that, this view of the labor force as something government provides, as a public good, if you will, is an old notion, and one that is basically is no longer relevant to contemporary labor market. I mean, we do know that employers need to invest more in training. In training people and not expecting the labor market to automatically provide exactly what it is that they need. So I think that's part of it, and we're trying to play a role here in talking about the need for companies to develop line items around employee training if they don't have them, to invest, etc. I think that's key. I also think we do know that in terms of SMEs, about 80% of SMEs actually use informal mechanisms for interpersonal relationships for their hiring practices. In a context where you have a rapidly evolving labor force, rapidly evolving skill requirements, etc., informal mechanisms don't necessarily work. So talking about building relationships with their university career centers, talking about one of the things that we're we're advocating for is the creation of more opportunities around paid internships. Those types of things as part of the solution, and we're very adamant. So when we come out in our report on the EOI system, we'll have 13 recommendations, but very upfront we're saying really the EOI model is only part of the solution, right? If you accept the fact that there are skill shortages, if you accept that there are demographic pressures that are pending and very real very soon, we need to make sure that our domestic labor force is adequately trained and our training programs are aligned to support them, to support that. But also expression of interest is another avenue. They're both part of an overall robust set of labor market policies, and I just want to get that out there.
Yeah, I think Josh did a great job of covering most of it over there. The one thing I would add, as sort of a side note, is that I think this is actually an opportunity for a lot of our third-party settlement agencies to actually get more integrated into the labor market and actually directing settlement at the firm level. Because as we're talking about this, it's clear that settlement will now start in the workplace as opposed to for people arriving in Canada first and work coming second. Settlement is now going to be a workplace issue, and I think this is an opportunity for our settlement agencies to actually become more integrated into that entire process. And I think it's going to be needed because a lot of these, a lot of small, medium-sized enterprises, again, we're going back to this issue about, a lack of HR capacity or a lack of tools to integrate and settle people. This is where these third-party agencies can make a real difference here, and I think that's worth noting.
Absolutely.
That's a good point. I would just remind all of our listeners and all of us as well that this is not all of immigration. It's one small part of it. It's a significant part. But the numbers, the 250,000 numbers, are made up of many, many groups of people, including refugees, including spouses, including parents and grandparents, etc. So yes, there will be a shift for settlement agents, agencies and others. But it's not the whole system, it's a part of the system.
That's an important point.
Absolutely.
So before we go to questions from the floor, there is a poll question, which I'm not sure people will be able to answer, but given the information that they have, let's see what they say. Are you ready to use EOI as part of your larger recruitment strategy? And the responses, I think, may well be indicative of the fact, not of the fact that they are prepared or not prepared, but that they need more information, which we, of course, hope will be forthcoming sometime in the next year. So I think my assumption was right. 72%, 76%, 75%, 73%, it moves all the time, are still feel they need to know more. I'm going to interpret this as that as opposed to anything else. So we are going to go to questions from the floor. I have the privilege of asking the first question. Please type in your questions and your name, if you can, or the name of your institution. That would be helpful, and I will moderate the questions as best as I am able to. So let me ask all three of you, because really Christina is also a co-presenter here now. What is the role of third-party intermediaries supporting employers and helping immigrants when it comes to the new EOI model? We've heard from Francis about the interface between settlement agencies and employers. We've heard from Josh about the intrinsic and important role of chambers of commerce, etc. Is there another kind of third-party intermediary that we're missing, or can you expand on that a little?
So, it's Josh here. I think that actually we've been hearing loud and clear that, especially large firms would like to continue using. They do use already third-party recruiters for international candidates, and they would very much like to continue to use them. And, to echo Francis's point earlier about, the lack of HR departments, et cetera, for small firms, third parties are going to be crucial on both sides. One, the search and recruit side, absolutely important, and also on the settlement side. And I think that the system has to be designed to allow for third-party intermediaries at both sort of the front end and the back end. And I think that herein lies an opportunity for, again, a lot of the settlement agencies and employer organizations, et cetera. So I think, both nonprofit and I think it's absolutely crucial. If this system is going to work, you actually need to lower the information and search costs. The cost of, time is money, and the cost of finding candidates, et cetera, for SMEs, and I think you can't do it without it.
Do you think, and this is sort of just off the bat, and I really do want to go to the audience, so please keep your answers short, otherwise they'll kill me here. How will it impact the temporary foreign worker program? Will it?
I think that's more of a question for Christine. I mean, I certainly have preferences around this question, but I'm happy to listen.
Okay.
Sure, it's Christina. I can speak to temporary foreign worker, the program, but also in terms of just to circle back to the question about the role of third parties. Lots of details are still to be finalized, but it is absolutely the case that there will be a role for third parties in an EOI world, both frankly from the supply side and from the demand side. So I think Francis and Josh spoke to employers using recruiters. There will be a role for recruiters to continue that work. As I noted, many of employers who use ESDC's job bank system may know that there actually is a formalized, regulated way that recruiters can use the job bank system on behalf of employers. There will likely be, that role will continue in some form. And from the supply side, certainly consultants are an important part of the immigration system now in helping interested foreign nationals navigate the system. We like to think that we're going to develop a simple and easy-to-use tool for EOI candidates. Having said that, there will absolutely be a role for third parties and consultants on that supply side.
Thank you, Christina. We have questions coming in fast and furious. A question about best practice. Is this a best practice from New Zealand and Australia? And I think we know the answer to that, but perhaps someone, either Josh or Francis or Christina, can comment on if this is a best practice from Australia and New Zealand. What has their experience been? And what are some of the pros and cons that we know of?
Sure, it's Christina. I'm happy to start, and Josh and or Francis, you may have other information or intelligence to share. Absolutely, the development of Canada's expression of interest system is a best practice based on models in New Zealand and Australia. As some employers may know, the system in New Zealand's been in operation for about a decade. The system in Australia, it's called Skills Select, has been in operation now for about a year. Both jurisdictions are finding that the system is working very well in terms of better processing of applications and also meeting labor market demands in a more robust way. And we work and consult very heavily and have traveled to both jurisdictions. And in particular, we have fairly regular engagement with our Australia colleagues who are fresh off the development of the system and are certainly learning what works from them.
Okay. Josh, Francis, comments on what
Sure.
you know?
I mean, one thing we know is that the processing times, I think particularly in New Zealand, it is very, very fast. And I think that one of the things that we benefit from is the fact that these two jurisdictions have sort of experimented with this model first. The one point that I think that comes out from those is that if this system is going to work, it needs to be world beating in terms of processing times. And we know that there's the timelines that are formally out there right now are 4 to 6 months, and I think New Zealand is something like 58 days or something like that. If we're going to compete globally for talent, we have to make sure that we're benchmarking against these systems and that we're actually beating them. I think that has to be from a processing time, if we're going to adopt the best and brightest, as Minister Kenny suggests, then that certainly is a must.
I think it's worth noting, and I won't add any more to the function of that because I think Josh and Christina covered it fairly well, but I think it's worth noting that a lot of other jurisdictions are cluing in to the notion that immigration, or skilled immigration in particular, will play a vital role in addressing sort of economic malaise issues due to population aging and whatnot. Even jurisdictions that previously were very prone to not wanting immigration, countries like Japan or Germany have now instituted skilled immigration programs. Canada and countries like Australia and New Zealand are much farther along in the process in terms of, just the selection process in general, settlement, integration into the labor market, so on and so forth, and just being more accepting of immigration in general. But it's worth noting that those competitive pressures that Josh was alluding to are coming, and they are coming very, very fast.
Excellent. Now, there are lots and lots of questions, but I'm going to ask the one that seems to reflect the interests of a group of people. It comes from Sarah Anson Cartwright, and this is for Christina. If employers have no direct access to the portal, to the pool of candidates, where exactly will employers find the candidates? How will this function?
Yeah, excellent question. We're looking at pursuing a couple of avenues. A primary way employers and EOI candidates will connect is through ESDC's job bank system. So through a modernized job bank system, there will be an opportunity for employers to not only post a job, but also to be matched with interested labor supply, both domestic labor supply, that will be a first requirement, and then following that we'll be able to actually be matched with EOI candidates. So EOI candidates will register on Job Bank and then be matched with employers after employers have looked to the domestic workforce. And at that time, employers will be able to receive very detailed, based on sophisticated search algorithms, a suite of EOI candidates that meet the criteria in their job posting. So that's one, and we think the main way employers and EOI candidates will connect. They will then, employers would, we imagine, do currently their robust vetting, interview, processing stage, whatever works for their practices. That will take place. We are also pursuing another series of avenues for employers and EOI candidates to match, and that is where we're hoping that that the private sector job matching world will be interested in finding a way to allow EOI candidates to be connected with employers. So one could imagine some of the big players in the private sector job matching world are places like Workopolis, Monster.com, and LinkedIn. And our earlier consultations notes that many employers look to those tools to find candidates now. So those conversations haven't started in a formal way, but something we'll be pursuing.
Ratna, this is Josh. Would you mind if I ask a follow-up question to that
Sure.
one? So what's the rationale for not allowing employers to look into the pool directly? I mean, certainly you can anonymize candidates, et cetera, but I'm just curious about that because certainly we're hearing that employers would like to actually see the pool and go into the pool.
I guess what we'd say is there are two, and maybe a better way to communicate the EOI world is it's not that it's that there are in effect two pools or two ways. The privilege that province and territories will have in having a direct portal and CIC through formal roles and selection, there's a different level of information and privacy and security and frankly legislative frameworks that are in place to allow a particular relationship for provinces and territories and CIC. So all these alternatives paths are in a way going to allow employers and EOI candidates to connect. It's just not connecting in the EOI CIC-based pool, but from an employer's perspective, there will be connections made and employers will have the opportunity to obviously meet and vet any interested in any EOI candidate that they're interested with. So it's just a different place that they'll meet up, but the bottom line we imagine for employers is that they will be able to connect.
Okay, so there's a question that I think it's more of a recommendation rather than a question, and it speaks to the tensions in doing this. Employers want direct access to candidates. the research tells us that if you anonymize the application process, the floor is leveled. So we just put that to you, Christina, to think about before we go to a question about will employers who want to access the EOI still need to fill out an LMO? How will this affect the PNP at all?
So in our consultations, we've heard two views, and certainly views are mixed on this. A lot of employers, recognize the need for LMOs, and that is, the need to demonstrate that you've tried to tap the domestic labor market first. Others point out, though, that if I'm going to the trouble of accessing the EOI system and I'm prepared to pay the cost associated with it, and chances are I've already tapped the local labor market. So I think that employer views are split. I think employers, though, are I would say fairly adamant around the need for accelerated LMOs. So and to bring those back, I think that if there are LMOs, I think that certainly that would be part of that. Should be part of it.
Okay, and here comes an interesting question from Tim Owen. Hello, Tim. Given the complexity of recruiting overseas, will much, any, or some of the EOI recruitment focus on people already in Canada, such as TFWs and international students? Should it?
This is Christina. I'm happy to take a first crack at that. The answer is absolutely yes. While policy decisions are still to be made, it's fair to say it's very likely that the skilled immigration categories that will be part of EOI at launch will include the Federal Skilled Worker Program, the Canadian Experience class, and the Federal Skilled Trades Program. So in that combination of immigration programs, there are absolutely a pool of eligible candidates for those programs who will already be in Canada and may already be employed.
Okay. What do you think of Josh Francis about using the EOI for people already in Canada? That would certainly collapse certain time frames.
Absolutely. I mean, our view was always that the TFW program has grown to a level that a lot of people, I think, are uncomfortable with, in particular the TFW program. And our view was always that it's important for these temporary people arriving in Canada to have a pathway to a permanent residency. Up to this point, the Canadian Experience class, which was that one route that people had, was relatively limited in the numbers that we were allowing to become permanent residents. It was only a few thousand, whereas in actuality we have several 100,000 temporary residents. So I think it's a really great thing that we are allowing an alternative. If I'm hearing this correctly, it's an alternative pathway, or is it just the same pathway? I was a bit unclear at that. So if it's a temporary foreign worker, I'm a little bit confused as to whether or not through the EOI system they can come in through the Federal Skilled Worker Program as a permanent resident. But if that's the case, I think that would actually be a very positive development.
Sure. Maybe it's worth, Ratna, if I may just clarify. So it's the three federal permanent immigration programs that I listed are the ones likely to be part of EOI at launch. And so EOI candidates will always have to meet those program criteria. So kind of, full stop there. At the same time, many of those in those three immigration categories have been TFWs, have been international students eligible for these permanent immigration programs. So I think that's the answer. The programs that are part of EOI are Canada's permanent immigration skilled programs. Having said that, some of those are TFWs working in Canada.
Okay, so maybe our last question before we, or maybe the second last question, we still have some time. One of the greatest challenges in recruiting skilled immigrants has always been the problematic issue of validating qualifications and credentials. What new processes are envisioned to ensure that we don't yet again bring people in through a new system with different avenues and then end up with the same problem? Christina?
Sure, Red. I'm not sure I understand that question. I think maybe the best reminder about EOI and validation processes is that all of the requirements for permanent immigration programs that are required today will continue to be required. That same vetting and validation will be required. So in fact, EOI, as I think Josh and Francis alluded to earlier, really is about an application management tool, but it's not a change to vetting or program criteria in any current immigration program.
Is the question, though, one way to interpret the question, Ratna, is that, will employers, who will be responsible if a candidate X says they have a PhD, who will be verifying whether or not they have a PhD? Is that the question?
Whether they can in fact practice in their profession in the jurisdiction they're going to because of licensing.
Yeah, it's absolutely crucial question, and I think that one of the things we need to think about carefully is how do we create those interfaces between the regulatory bodies and the within the application process. So when people apply, they have a clear understanding about whether or not they're actually going to be able to apply. So there needs to be, and we have recommendations around that on how to actually create that interface, and I think it's a really important one, and really in many respects the elephant in the room for a lot of potential immigrants.
I think one more thing to add here is that potentially it throws another wrench in for prospective immigrants, in that if you need the sort of accreditation even before you are allowed to apply, ultimately an employer can say, you don't have XYZ certification and therefore I'm not going to nominate you. That means that there's even more of the settlement process that has to happen before an immigrant even has a chance to apply for immigration, which means it has to happen when they're in their source country. So I think that's another complication throughout this whole process.
So our settlement sector may well be involved in pre-arrivals. It is to some extent, but not to the extent that it could be under this new system. There was a question, I saw it somewhere and I was curious about the answer. How will this, or will it at all, affect Quebec?
Christina, I'm happy to address that. Given Quebec runs its own immigration programming, Quebec will not be participating in the expression of interest program or application management system.
Thank you. I thought as much, but it was an interesting question. There are so many questions and there are so many issues that are still to be decided. For example, there's a question about how long applicants can stay in the pool, but I think I'm going to pass on these more operational questions because I believe that our next poll question, which is an important one for us, may tell us the answer. We are asking you, the audience, whether or not you think we should repeat a webinar on EOI once CIC has more information. We would all obviously invite CIC to present the new information. We would get Francis, Josh to also participate, but I'm hearing 100%, Christina, please take this back to the people in the ivory towers in Ottawa, that 100% of our audience would like to hear more about this new management tool once you are able to share the information.
I think it's worth, sorry, Ratna, I just think it's worth noting that and if I'm reading this right, the fact that 100% of people are interested really reflects what kind of an opportunity this does represent. Josh and I, and we've been sort of raising concerns and so on and so forth, but I think this is actually an exciting time. It really does represent one of the first opportunities that a lot of, for example, SMEs have of being directly related to this process, which I think really is an important opportunity. So I would take that as a very big positive, as not a lack of uncertainty, but people are interested in the opportunity.
I think, yeah, I concur with that wholeheartedly. I think that the discourse out there is sort of, agrees that the change in the old system wasn't quite working well, and the new system represents a real opportunity. And so when we release our reports, probably in a couple of weeks, in partnership with the Ministry of Citizenship and Immigration, I think that we've done quite a bit of due diligence, and I think we have real recommendations on how we think the system could and should work.
So I'm going to close now by putting the three of you a little bit on the spot, so I'll give you some time to think about it. Is there a question that you would like to see answered the next time we reconvene for a webinar on EOI. And whilst you think of that question, I'll remind the audience that there will be an evaluation coming out very shortly, a survey monkey to tell us how we did. And of course, please do watch out for more webinars coming up shortly. I believe next year in February we will do one on religious accommodation. And whilst Francis, Josh, and Christina are thinking about their question, they have one shot at a $1 million question they'd like to see answered or reflected on. Let me thank Francis Fong from TD Economics and Josh Hjartarson from the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and of course Christina Norris for participating in a very dynamic, I think, webinar, and your insightful review of labor market trends, what employers want, what government's needs are. Thank you to our audience too today for joining us, and I think I am going to start with asking Francis to ask his first question.
I think, well, I mean, a lot of this is around, we just don't have a lot of details around the program yet, and that's understandable given that it's still in the design phase. But if it were up to me, I mean, my question would be really, I would love to see more definition, more specific definition around what the role of all the stakeholders would be. I mean, I think we're sort of beyond the point where immigration is done in silos or that policy is conducted in silos. There are so many different players involved in this system, and I think it's important to have some specificity around each of the roles of the federal government, the provincial governments, the municipal governments, settlement agencies, immigration consultants, lawyers, employers. These are all important players, and the immigrants themselves, obviously. I think one of the questions that we never talked about, or one of the issues that we never talked about, is does this represent a more complicated process for prospective immigrants? We never really discussed that. But I would love to see some more definition around each of those roles.
So more definition around roles. Josh, over to you.
Sure. I've got 3, but I'm only going to give you 2. So how about that? So in terms of, I'm really curious about the requirements of employers who want to access the system. I mean, there's tension between system integrity, but also flexibility. And if you impose burdens that are too cumbersome on employers, you will have a demand problem for sure. Another is, what are the plans around the P&P? And are you going to address the Ontario's having only 5%? What is the long-term plan? How do we fix that? I think it's unprincipled.
Okay. And final question to you, Christina.
Okay, well, if my colleague took 2, I may leave you with 2. And I took your instructions, Ratna, to be questions to be answered of those from those on the phone. And so one is a continued interest in better understanding of the needs of employers and the different needs from small and medium-sized enterprises versus larger employers. And secondly, we're looking to, over the course of 2014, better understand the exact kind of information that might work for a range of audience, from demonstrations to presentations to newsletter information, so the range of materials that will most ground what the system aspires to do in 2015.
Thank you. I hope this means that we can count on the 3 of you to come back sometime next year. In the meantime, have a safe and happy holiday season. Our webinar will be recorded. You can access it pretty shortly, and we will send you a notice when it is available. Please do sign up for more e-tips, more good stories, more webinars. We're always here. Please give us your suggestions as well. And finally, fill out the survey that will be sent to you very shortly. Thank you, Francis. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Christina. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.